Saludos y bienvenidos a una edición más de Emprendedores. Tenemos un programa bien especial con una invitada más especial todavía. Vamos a hablar hoy de promesa, vamos a hablar de la Junta Fiscal. Es un tema que llevamos discutiendo aquí desde 2016 y son muchos los mitos y ha habido mucha desinformación sobre lo que significó la entrada de una Junta de Supervisión Fiscal a Puerto Rico. 4 años después, vamos a discutir hoy con la directora ejecutiva de la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal, la directora Natalie Jaresko, de cuáles han sido las experiencias, cuáles han sido los aciertos y los desaciertos de este proceso significativo para el futuro de Puerto Rico. Natalie nos va a explicar qué es promesa, qué busca la Junta Fiscal, qué son las reformas estructurales, cómo Puerto Rico sale de la quiebra. Son preguntas que el ciudadano promedio tiene que entender, porque esto es un proceso que su éxito va a depender de la voluntad no solo del gobierno de los Estados Unidos, no solo del Congreso Federal, no solo de la Junta y Promesa, sino de cada uno de nosotros como puertorriqueños. Así que hoy vamos a tener este diálogo franco y abierto con Natalie Jaresko, porque hay futuro si nos ponemos de acuerdo, si trabajamos juntos por un mejor Puerto Rico. Así que con eso comenzamos esta edición de Emprendedores. Bienvenidos a Emprendedores. Tonight we're glad to have a special guest, Natalie Jaresko, who is the Executive Director of the Fiscal Oversight Board. Natalie, thank you for accepting our invitation to talk about Puerto Rico's economic future and the agenda of the Oversight Board and Promesa. Before we move into the economic and fiscal topics, our audience would like to know, who is Natalie Jaresko?
I'm born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, by a family of immigrants to the United States. They came from the former Soviet Union, from Ukraine, and they escaped during World War II. So they were escaping communism, atheism, and Nazism, and war. And I grew up in a family very grateful for what the United States could give people who came to this country with nothing. No language, no job, no education, $5. They gave them $5 when they got off the boat. And I always believed that the United States had something special, that if you worked hard, you could create opportunity and you could do better than your parents, and your children could do better than you did. And I grew up believing that public policy really mattered. And I grew up kind of believing in John F. Kennedy, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And so I ended up going into, I did an undergraduate degree at DePaul University in accounting and business, because I thought business is what makes the economy function. And then I did a graduate degree, a master's at Harvard Kennedy School of Government, because I believe that public policy is really critical. Good public policy can create opportunity. Bad public policy can kill opportunity. And then I went into work, and I worked in the US government. I worked in business, investing in small and medium-sized business, because again, I believe that democracy requires small and medium-sized business to be successful. And if you don't have that, if you only have wealthy and poor, your society doesn't function, your democracy doesn't function. So I focused a lot on small and medium-sized business. And then over time, I went into the Ukrainian government. I was asked to serve, again, while they had war, post-revolution, the collapse of the economy, bankruptcy, and we exited bankruptcy. And we got the economy back from 9% GDP decline to 2% growth. We shrank the government deficit, and it worked. The policies worked. And after I did that, I was invited here to Puerto Rico, because some of the issues were the same. Not all, but the bankruptcy, the fiscal deficits, the need for structural reforms. And so what I did there has relevance here.
So great. So before you became the executive director of the board, and you have that experience in Ukraine, you know, what are the main difference, or how do you compare the situation with Ukraine in the geopolitical context of Ukraine, the issue with Russia, and Puerto Rico, which is a territory of the United States? What are the comparatives there?
So some things are very similar in terms of the need to develop an independent economy within the global economy. And Ukraine was dealing with post-colonial, post-Soviet. How do you develop new relationships? I feel that Puerto Rico is dealing with post-NAFTA, the new trade agreements. post-globalization, how do you develop the economy? How do you look at your competitive advantages and compete for every dollar of investment? Compete for your people to stay. Ukraine is facing a mass migration out of the country, like Puerto Rico is facing with professionals leaving the island. So a lot of those things are similar. Bankruptcy is similar. Poor financial management that leads to bankruptcy. Running deficits. Ukraine was running deficits, led to bankruptcy. We had to do a debt restructuring. Puerto Rico was running deficits, not managing the budget, couldn't afford its debt, and now we have to deal with a bankruptcy. So there are many similarities. Of course, there are differences. Puerto Rico has rule of law. And that is a huge competitive advantage. When you look around the Caribbean, you look around other places where people are investing right now. Puerto Rico has the US rule of law system, and that is a huge competitive advantage. And then Puerto Rico has the US dollar. So you don't have currency risks. In Ukraine, you had massive currency risk with a non-convertible currency. So some things are different, some are better, some are worse. But I think the key to change is the same. You need leadership that has a vision of how to grow the economy, how to sustain it, and how to incentivize people, how to incentivize you and everyone outside to be a part of it and to invest their skills, their knowledge, their money into building Puerto Rico.
So Ukraine formally declared bankruptcy during your time as a Minister of Finance there?
No, we avoided default. We didn't have promesa. So, and our banking system was extremely weak, and I did everything I could to avoid actually a default. So I had a very short time frame in which I had to negotiate a debt restructuring that would be acceptable to the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, before we defaulted. Because had we defaulted, our currency would have collapsed, our banking system would have collapsed, and so we all had to be aware that default was a very bad thing for a weak economy, and so we had to avoid default and restructure before that.
And how is the economy in Ukraine after all those reforms were implemented? Is the Ukraine better now? The quality of life is growing? How do you describe the situation in your motherland?
So, my other motherland, United States is one motherland,
Yeah.
Ukraine is my other
You have
motherland.
both.
I have two.
Like us, we have Puerto Rico and the United States.
Exactly.
So basically, it's
Exactly.
kind of the same situation.
It's better. Not all reforms were finished, and that's a problem. You need to do all of it. Only a portion of it happened, but certainly the economy has been growing between 2% and 4% every year since then. Again, and that's after a 9% decline in GDP. So we just fell off a cliff. The currency is stable. Again, we had a 65% devaluation. Your money was worth half what it was the day before. So the currency is stable. Inflation is low. And investment is coming back. The war is still going on, unfortunately. And so that is something that's not an economic reform. That's a reality. When 7-8% of the territory has Russian troops on it,
Wow.
it's hard to manage around that. So I think some things have really changed for the better, but they still need to do more structural reforms. The thing is, just like for Puerto Rico, you may have gotten something done, but others are doing their reforms too. And so you're always trying to be slightly ahead. So if you stop and Ireland keeps going, in your book, the example of Singapore and Ireland, if they keep reforming, if they keep deregulating, and if they keep getting better, and you stand still, you're falling behind.
Okay, so we're going to make a quick pause and then we'll continue with Emprendedores.
Decir el vocero es decir lo que nadie quiere oír, pero tienen que escuchar. Decir el vocero es decir la verdad, porque decir la verdad es decir el vocero, el periódico número 1 de Puerto Rico. La verdad no tiene precio.
And now we'll continue with Emprendedores with this great interview with Natalie Jaresko, the Executive Director of the Oversight Board in Puerto Rico. Natalie, it looks to me that the average citizen is not clear about the role of Promesa and the Oversight Board in the island. what is the main objective of Promesa and the board right now in Puerto Rico?
You're so right. You know, we hear people say, you're infringing on democracy, you're doing too much. And then we have others who say, you're not doing enough. Fix this, do this, make it different. And the truth is, the authority in Promesa is very narrow. It's to exit, to negotiate the debt and exit bankruptcy, and to put the island's finances back into balance, sustainability, the ability to run the government without deficits. That's it.
But do you believe the average Puerto Rican understand that?
No.
4 years after? Why?
No.
Why?
Because,
Do they
I mean,
believe that's relevant for their life?
no, I don't think they do. I think if you ask particular groups that have felt it,
Which
so
groups?
if you
Which
ask the
groups?
police, right? If you ask the police, when Promesa started, were owed years of back pay, that for whatever reason, the government had not paid them their back pay. We resolved that. We paid out all the back pay over 3 years. We budgeted it. We did it within a budget that was balanced, and they got their back pay. Then the police noticed that cops were leaving the island. They were going to the mainland. They weren't even going always to be cops. They were going to be truck drivers and other things, meaning their compensation was just not enough. And we looked at that, and we raised their salaries over 2 years, 30%. They talked to me about the quality of their life insurance and how bad their life insurance was.
The police force.
The police unions.
So you talked to them? You
Yes,
have? Okay.
we met with the unions.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And, you know, I can't change their pensions because the pension was frozen in 2016, before Promesa. The pension system was bankrupted and it was frozen, ERS, the Employment Retirement System. So for the police, that's an important thing, is their pension. And I can't help them with the pension. It's bankrupt, it's over. But so we helped them with their compensation, with their life insurance, with equipment, with vehicles. We made sure to prioritize public safety in the budget. Not only public safety, but I'm giving you an example of someone, if you talk to them, you interview them, they will understand the role of prioritizing funds for your priorities: public safety, public education, public health. In the last 2 years, well, in the fiscal years during COVID, we prioritized in the budget process over $400 million of investments in public health, to make investments in each of the public hospitals, to make investments in telehealth, to make investments in making the public health care system better. Now, the board works through the budget, but in the end, those investments have to be executed by the government. And that's where I think the average citizen doesn't understand, right? So the board made sure that there was enough money to purchase all the laptops that were needed for the children and the teachers and the principals in the schools. But today, what you hear, unfortunately, is a lot of criticism, complaining that the kids don't have the laptops, even the teachers don't have the laptops. Well, that has to do with the procurement process in the Department of Education. They haven't received them yet. Maybe they haven't distributed some of them yet. That's management. The board isn't managing the government. And that's where I think that difficulty for the average citizen, because the money is there now for the laptops.
But they blame.
But they don't have the laptops.
But that's something that is very frustrating, because when they don't have laptops or they don't have all the equipment for the police force, they blame the board. But the one that has to be blamed is the government that is not executing
It
managing the resources.
became very easy politically to blame the board. In particular, you know, when we first started, I remember secretaries of the Department of Public Safety coming out and saying, we don't have enough money to pay the police salaries. Police started leaving. If you didn't have a job, you'd leave.
Of course.
The fact of the matter is they had more than enough money, and they ended the year with, I think, $9 million unspent in payroll. But the government isn't looking at their books and records. They're not managing the money. And so he came out and he was front page.
So can we agree that the government at large doesn't have a managing culture, the metrics?
No question.
And I wasn't the government.
No question. No question. There's
So that was
not a regular budget compared to actual, so you don't know how much you spend.
So no
You have
metrics?
6 different accounting systems that don't speak to each other. You don't have your annual financial audits finished.
Yes.
You're years behind. So that's a metric, right? The normal time is 6 months after the close of the fiscal year. So We finish our year June 30th, we should have an audit by December 31st, okay, January, whatever. We're years behind. We're still waiting for 2017. If you think about it, there's one thing the board has been asking for, and it's an office of a CFO. One office that really manages the finances, not separately, Hacienda,
centralized.
One centralized, manage the money.
So we can have a comprehensive vision of how the money is spending, how to do some financial planning. So we don't have that yet.
No.
Wow, crazy.
And there are very critical issues. For example, right now the Department of Education couldn't be more important, right? We talked about this, 280,000 kids.
Mm-hmm.
They are having trouble accessing federal funds. Federal funds are really important to the Department of Education. If they don't get full access soon, what's going to happen?
Wow.
It's hundreds of millions of dollars. Someone has to be thinking and planning and pressing and pushing and analyzing.
Great. So we're going to go to a quick commercial break, and then we'll come back with more of this interview.
Decir el vocero es decirlo sin partidos, sin colores. Decir el vocero es decir la verdad, porque decir la verdad es decir El Vocero, el periódico número 1 de Puerto Rico. La verdad no tiene precio.
We continue with Emprendedores with our interview with Natalie Jaresko, the Executive Director of the Fiscal Oversight Board in Puerto Rico. Natalie, Puerto Rico is not the first jurisdiction that have gone through this kind of experience of having an external oversight board or control board. We have New York back in the 70s, Washington, D.C. in the 90s, and most recently Detroit went through some kind of oversight. What are the main achievements of PROMESA 4 years later that the law was enacted?
So I think the key thing that PROMESA gave Puerto Rico was a stay on all the debt. Puerto Rico couldn't afford to pay the debt, and without PROMESA, creditors would have been going to the courts, making demands for payments, and they had those legal rights. So PROMESA gave Puerto Rico breathing room. It gave us a stay so we could take time to figure out what is affordable and negotiate and restructure the debt. We've restructured about 40% of the debt. Remember, there's about $72 billion of debt, about a dozen different organizations. We've restructured the COFINA, PRASA, and the Government Development Bank, GDB. That's about 40%. The two big pieces that remain unrestructured are the Commonwealth and PREPA. The restructuring reduced the amount of debt that Puerto Rico has to pay. So for COFINA, it went from $18 billion to 12. It's about a third less in terms of debt service, in terms of debt. For GDB, it was 45% reduced. So it's significant reduction in the amount of debt, but yet fair and through the courts, and in a way that, for example, the new COFINA debt that was issued after the restructuring is trading well. And it's important because getting market access, being out of bankruptcy and getting market access again, is critical for Puerto Rico's long-term growth. You can't build roads, schools, bridges without having access to capital markets and borrowing. So eventually we need to get through that. The second part of what we have done in the past 4 years is institute some fiscal responsibility. So Puerto Rico wasn't living by its budgets previously. You passed a budget, but no one knew whether or not you lived within it. In fact, we know that there was overspending, which caused borrowing. Mm-hmm. Now the government is living within the budget. So that's one issue. 2, transparency. I think that fiscal responsibility requires transparency so that every single person can see and understand. So we have funds. How are they being spent? Every single person should be able to know that. If we passed together with the government, we agreed on a $787 million package of support right when COVID hit, right in March. How much of it has been dispersed? To whom? Did the police get their bonuses? Did the nurses? We're 5 months later. So I think having that transparency, publishing this information, the bank accounts, when we first came in, I don't know what happened here, why there's no centralized source of information, but no one knew how many bank accounts, how much was in the bank accounts, who had bank accounts, and now we have, updated regularly, I think it's 12,000 bank accounts, and how much money and where the money's going. So I think this fiscal responsibility and transparency we have kickstarted. It's not over, it's not done. We're not done with the restructuring, we need more time, but there have been a lot of interruptions. Hurricanes, earthquakes, change in government, COVID. And it is something that Promesa didn't expect, right? Promesa wasn't written for all of that, so it's taking a bit longer than it should.
So 4 years later, what are the main weaknesses of Promesa as Congress enacted back in 2016? And what changes do you believe, or what kind of a transformation of the law have to be done by Congress to be more connected to our reality now?
I don't think Congress is going to change the law. I think that it was a very difficult fought compromise, and it's going to stay as it is. But if I were to say what's missing in terms of what's needed to move Puerto Rico forward, one is structural reforms. Promesa is about fiscal. It's about budget. Structural reforms aren't about budget. Structural reforms are about how easy is it to do business. How is permitting work in Puerto Rico? How competitive is Puerto Rico? How is the education system? Is it delivering results? Are children's scores going up? Workforce development, labor participation. Is labor participation going up? Because we can't fix Puerto Rico solely by restructuring the debt and balancing the budget. So structural reforms are missing from Promesa. And they're critical because without them, Puerto Rico cannot rise again. The other thing I'd say is missing is in Washington, D.C., it worked well because the CFO reported, in essence, to the board. And so here, you don't have any direct authority. It's a lot of letters exchanging, sometimes lawsuits when you can't agree. But the ability to actually execute is all in the government's hand, none in the oversight. And that's the difference, really, between an oversight board and a control board. We're not a control board. And that's something that people in Puerto Rico forget.
And actually, I want to be honest. When I went to Congress back in 2015, my first proposal to some people over there, some folks, was that Puerto Rico need a control board, not an oversight board. I know that's another discussion, but 4 years later, from my personal perspective, I believe that we still need a control board. I understand you that there's no environment in Congress to change Promesa, but I do believe that we should create some kind of consensus between the politicians and the private sector and the other professional organizations to go to Congress together to fix Promesa or to change Promesa and to adapt it to our new reality. But that's another discussion, just a thought that I wanted to share with you. But we cannot have the transformations, without these structural reforms. What are these structural reforms for the average Puerto Rican to understand? What do you mean by that?
So the base of how our economy functions depends on people, and people need education and skills. So structural reform for people is about how to improve the human capital in Puerto Rico. The second is how to put more people to work. We have the lowest labor participation rate almost in the world, compared to the mainland, compared to the Caribbean. Dominican Republic is higher. It shouldn't be that way. We need more people to be in the formal working economy. So what can we do? What reforms can we do to get more people to work? Welfare to work, EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, keep the lower middle class working, things like that. The third thing for Puerto Rico to prosper, to grow, is electricity. If we don't have low-cost, reliable electricity, you can't keep people here, you can't keep business here. And fourth, it is about the ease of doing business. If, again, we're competing for every dollar. Every Puerto Rican investment dollar is deciding whether to put it into Puerto Rico or Florida, Puerto Rico or DR, Puerto Rico or... Everybody's competing. And so how easy is it to get a permit here?
It's a nightmare.
How easy is it to, how many occupational licensing do we have? We make it hard for people to work here. It's easier for someone to get a job in Florida, and so they go to Florida. So ease of doing business is the last one. All of these are kind of the pillars of your economy. You need human capital, you need it to be easy to do business, you need low cost, reliable electricity, and you need infrastructure. Infrastructure, I think, given the federal monies that are coming after the hurricane, I think we'll have the infrastructure. If we build that infrastructure with the money right, that pillar we'll have. But we still need to focus on human, ease of doing business, and electricity.
So would you agree with me that the institutional framework doesn't work any longer? The system that we put together back in the 40s and the 50s is basically obsolete?
I'd have to say it's certainly not working well enough,
All right.
right? Because the people of Puerto Rico deserve better.
Okay.
So it's not working well enough.
So it's transformation. It's transformation. We're going to talk about that in our next segment.
Decir el vocero es decirlo sin filtro, con pantalones. Decir el vocero es decir la verdad, porque decir la verdad es decir El Vocero, el periódico número 1 de Puerto Rico. La verdad no tiene precio.
Y llegamos a esta primera mitad de la entrevista a Natalie Jaresko, la directora ejecutiva de la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal, donde nos habla el proceso, cómo ha transcurrido estos primeros 4 años desde que entró en vigor la ley promesa que habilita la misma Junta de Supervisión Fiscal, los aciertos, los desaciertos, las áreas de debilidad que tiene la propia ley, desmitificando muchas cosas que me parece han sido traídas fuera de contexto por parte de algunas personas en Puerto Rico, y el poco entendimiento que aparentemente todavía hay a nivel de la sociedad puertorriqueña con respecto a la importancia que tiene este proceso de la ley promesa, la misión que tiene la Junta Fiscal, y me parece que pudimos cubrir todas esas áreas más importantes. Yo creo que ahora hay que internalizar nosotros como sociedad el propósito de que ustedes puedan digerir y puedan contextualizar toda esta discusión, y que puedan darle a ustedes una perspectiva a futuro y sean parte de la solución. Así que vamos a estar hablando de la segunda parte de esta entrevista para completarla y así tener un cierre final de este proceso importante para Puerto Rico. Así que los espero en el próximo programa de Emprendedores.